So let's go through these.
Okay.
Number one, label the demand curves with a D and an S, supply curve with an X. So at this point, you all should know which is which. If you don't, pay attention. So supply curve is which one? The red or the blue?
Red.
Yeah. And demand.
Blue.
Okay. So we have the supply and demand curves labeled. And then in this first graph, what quantity of meat are producers willing to sell at €4? So quantity of meat producers. So producers means we're on which curve? The supply or demand curve? Supply. So if we're looking at the supply curve, go to €4. Producers are willing to supply 20 units of meat, right? Okay. So at that point, and the Y is missing, but it should be there. So it's 20. Oh yeah, okay. So then in the second graph, what quantity of meat are consumers willing to buy at €2? So we're talking about consumers, which curve are we on? Demand. So if we're on the demand curve, we go to €2, we're gonna be at this point. So what quantity of meat are they, yeah. Yes. All right. And one, at what price are consumers willing to buy 25 units of meat? So again, consumers means we're on which curve? Right. So if we're at demand and we're looking at 25 units of meat, we're about here or €1.50. Okay. And two, what price are producers willing to sell 40 units of meat? So producers means we're on the supply curve, 40 units of meat. So we have €2. In one, what is the equilibrium price? So we go where the supply, quantity supplied equals quantity demanded. So the price would be what? €3. And then in one, what is the equilibrium quantity? Yes, 10 units of meat. In two, what's the equilibrium price? Yep, €1. So we're at this point, and then what's the quantity? 30 units. Okay, so surplus or shortage of meat would be caused in this graph if price were set at €2. So if we're looking here, we would have shortage. All right, so you guys are getting this, good. And then we have a surplus or shortage of meat in two if the price were set at €2. Yes. And then list two possible causes for a shift in the graphs from this to this. So what's happening in these graphs? What's the shift that's occurring, Sydney?
Well, more is being supplied. So
Yes.
it can be like the opportunity cost of producing the meat went down.
Right.
And stuff.
Yeah, so we're shifting from the supply curve here all the way down here. And then it's a change in supply, so a technical advancement. So if you're better at producing something, your costs go down. You can produce more. If they expected the future price to go up, they're more willing to produce it because they're going to get a higher price or higher profit from it. If there's substitutes in production, so goods can be produced using the same resources, that would also shift the curve to the right for the supply. Okay?
Can you keep that up there for a second?
Sure.
Are those our two reasons? Or is there another reason after that? It says those
Let's see. If the price of resources went down, that would also cause a shift, because it's less expensive to produce. And complements in production, goods must be produced together, so if one of the complements went down, like producing one went down, the other one would shift as well. Oh, also, if more suppliers, if there's more people producing that item, the supply would increase and therefore shift. Okay, so it's this next slide that's gonna be important to understand, especially for your second part of the test. Okay, so suppose the following supply and demand curves are for hot dogs. Illustrate the effect on the graph if the price of hamburger rises. Here.
The demand for hot dogs would rise, right? So you make it like a point lower on the demand line.
Right, so are we talking about a movement or a shift?
It's a shift because it's a price, but it's not the price for the hot dogs, it's the price for the hamburgers. So which one's shifting?
I thought the demand for the shift.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
okay,
this-
never mind, it makes sense.
Yeah. So the demand curve shifts out. And then what name is given to goods that are used in place of other goods?
Substitute.
Right. So, because they're substitutes, this is the graph for hot dogs. So we're asking what effect would the price of hamburgers increase in half? So if you go to the store and you're either gonna get hot dogs or hamburgers, you see the price of hamburgers has gone up, you're gonna demand more hot dogs. So that's why it shifts out towards the right. Does that make sense here? Okay. So yeah, it is a price thing, but since we're looking at what effect it has on hot dogs, if it were the graph for hamburgers, then it would be a movement because the price has increased. But since we're looking at hot dogs. Okay, so, increase in demand for hot dogs, and those are substitutes. I'll just give that one away. Illustrate the effect on the graph if the price of hot dog buns rises. So let's actually answer this next one before we look at what we're gonna do. So what name is given to goods that are used in conjunction with each other? Complements, right. So if the price of hot dog buns rises, what's gonna happen to hot dogs? Yeah.
The demand's gonna shift to the left because people aren't gonna wanna buy the hot dogs if the hot dog buns are so expensive.
Yeah, so we're gonna shift the demand curve to the left and move from here to our new equilibrium prices there, right? So there's a decrease in demand of hot dogs because it's now more expensive to buy the hot dog buns. Those are called complements. And then in this graph, illustrate the effect on the graph if hot dog production machinery becomes more technologically advanced. So if we're thinking about the machinery, so did you have a question or you want to answer? Yeah. So if we're looking at the machinery, are we thinking about the suppliers or the demanders? Suppliers, okay, so what were you gonna say?
I would say the supply would increase the membership.
So supply curve shifts to the right. Is this making more sense? Okay.
The next one's the one I have a question.
Okay. So if we can produce things more efficiently, we can make more supply increases. And then list another technological advancement that could have a similar result. So right now we're talking about if we're better at producing them, what else could shift the supply curve to the right? Natalie?
Like, if the buns had a better technological advancement, then it would be cheaper to like make them. So then, like, the hot dogs would be more demand, and so then the suppliers would like supply more.
Yeah, in
Is
the
that
long run.
correct? Yeah.
In the long run, yeah.
Is that too, then when I tried to explain it, it doesn't make sense. Yeah.
Well, what else would?
There are more suppliers.
More suppliers. Also, what about future prices?
If suppliers think that the price will eventually rise, then they'll be more likely to sell more
Right.
or produce more.
Right. so, illustrate the effect on the graph if consumers' income rises. And then, what is the main, let's answer the second part, because this kind of gives you an idea of what we're looking for. So what is the main given to goods for which use of that good decreases when income increases? Right? Yeah, so an inferior good. So as your income is rising, you no longer have to buy Folgers coffee. You can now afford a Starbucks. So what happens? Illustrate the effect on the graph. If consumer income rises, what would happen then?
The demand for hot dogs would, go down, so it'd shift to the left because hot dogs are an inferior good.
Yeah, it kind of depends. If we're thinking of hot dogs as an inferior good, which we will for this example, the demand would shift to the left.
If it were like a car, would it shift to the right then?
If this was the graph of a car and we're looking at still an inferior good, it would shift to the left. Does that make sense? Because as your income,
But what if it was not?
if it was a normal
Yeah.
good, if it's a normal good, you're gonna shift to the right. If for a car, like a nice car, you're gonna demand more of it as your income increases. Okay. So demand will decrease because you can now afford nicer goods. My little sister, it's really funny, she has like this car that has like 200,000 miles on it. It's like falling apart, like you just touch it and like paint chips. So anyway, whenever she's using something nice and it goes bad, she's like, this is why I can't have nice things. So she has a lot of inferior goods, but maybe if her income rises, she'll get nicer things. Okay. Alright, so fill in the blanks. Blank is the relationship between price and the amount of blank or service that blank planned to buy. So if we're talking about planning to buy, are we talking about suppliers or demanders?
Demand. So would the quantity demanded
Just demand.
or just demand?
Demand is the relationship between price and the amount of a
Good.
good or service that
Consumers.
consumers plan to buy. Okay, so then blank is the relationship between price and the amount of a good or blank that producers plan to blank.
Supply. Service. Sell.
So, it looks pretty on my computer, so unfortunately I'm gonna transfer. Okay, so assume the following supply and demand curves are for the labor market. Label the graph with a D for demand and an S for supply. At this point, you all know that S goes up on top and D goes on bottom. In a market economy, the supply of labor comes from households or firms. And then in a market economy, the demand for labor comes from, right. And then below explain how a government minimum wage restriction, like the one drawn on this graph, results in inefficiency of unemployment. So if the government is saying there's a minimum wage restriction, so you have to pay at least this much, do we have a price ceiling or a price floor? Page?
That's the price floor,
Yeah, price floor.
and it would cause like unemployment because the firm would only have enough money to pay so many employees, and so they wouldn't be able to like employ as many people as they would otherwise, so then there aren't as many jobs available.
Yeah, because what happens is firms aren't gonna eat the cost, they're not just gonna be generous and say, okay, well, we'll just not have as big of a profit, we'll pay you what you wanna be paid. They're gonna say, hang on, our profit margin is getting smaller and smaller because now we have to pay you $7.50 an hour instead of $6 an hour. That adds up over the week. So what they do is they'll lay people off And then, so that way they can pay the employees they keep on longer. So the government has created an excess supply of workers because firms will not eat the cost of paying more workers. Firms will lay off workers in order to pay higher wages to the employees. And I don't have the rest of it. But you basically understand like what's happening there. And because it's a price floor, we're above the equilibrium point, so the quantity demanded stirs, and then the quantity supplied. Right? Okay. Explain how consumer sovereignty relates to the price of a good tending to move toward equilibrium if the price of a good is initially set too high or too low. And the answer's there. Madeline?
No, I was thinking
Well, what were you thinking? Just tell me and I'll tell if you're right or wrong.
like the invisible hand thing, like,
Yeah.
can you say it?
Right, so by doing what you want, like by buying things you want and producers producing the amounts they do, eventually we move back to equilibrium. So if the price is too high, what happens?
There's a surplus because consumers don't wanna buy, or don't wanna pay so much, so the producers slowly lower their prices and consumers start to buy more until it gets back to equilibrium.
Right. And then if the price is set too low, what happens? Sydney?
There will be a shortage because the demand will be too high, therefore the suppliers will, set higher prices for their goods or services and move it back towards equilibrium.
Right. Okay. And then, Mrs. Brody talked about price controls, right? Do you guys feel pretty comfortable with this?
Yeah, just the price floor and the price ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, so price ceilings are maximum prices set by the government for particular goods and services that they believe are being sold at too high of a price, and thus consumers need some help purchasing them. So price ceilings only become a problem when they are set below the equilibrium price. Here. When the ceiling is set below the market price, there will be excess demand or a shortage or a supply shortage. Producers won't produce as much at the lower price, while consumers will demand more because the goods are cheaper. Demand will outstrip supply, so there will be a lot of people who want to buy at this lower price but can't. Still, if the demand curve is relatively elastic, then the net effect to consumer surplus will be positive. Producers are truly harmed as their surplus is doubly hit with a reduction in the number of firms willing to take that lower price. And those who remain in the market have to take a lower price. So the resulting shortage of goods can lead to consumers having to queue up in the line of a good, in line to get the good, government rationing, so the allotment of goods and services, you kind of have to wait. And even the development of a black market dealing with the scarce goods. This is what occurred with the energy crisis in America during the 1970s when cars had to line up on the street in order just to get some government rationed amount of gasoline. And then we have price floor, so we're above the equilibrium point. Price floors are minimum prices set by the government for certain commodities and services that it believes are being sold in an unfair market with too low of a price, and thus their producers deserve some assistance. Price floors are only an issue when they are set above the equilibrium price, since they have no effect if they are set below market clearing price. When they are set above the market price, there's a possibility that there will be an excess supply or surplus. If this happens, producers who can't foresee trouble ahead will produce the larger quantity where the new price intersects their supply curve. Unbeknownst to them, consumers will not buy that many goods at the higher price, and so those goods will go unsold. Alright, so then they would have to lower their price to get rid of that excess that they produced. So a change in quantity versus a change just change. So on the test yesterday, this is what I was looking for, is that quantity supplied and quantity demanded are movements along the curve. Okay, making sense now? So the price is either increased or decreased, and you just simply move from one point to another. So for here, moving up, it's, huh? It's alright, I survived somehow, for 3 days to 2. Okay, so we're talking about just a movement along the curve, that could be either the demand curve or the supply curve, and in either direction. So this is a change in quantity, either supplied or demanded. And then a change in supply or a change in demand is a shift of the curve. So something other than price has affected the supply or demand of a product or service. So when we were looking at hot dog graphs and then the effect of a change in the price of hamburgers, that change in hamburgers caused a change in the supply or the demand of hot dogs. So that's why it shifted, because there's a change other than the price of the hot dog, right? Mac, making sense? Okay. Do you have any questions on a change versus a quantity, either supplied or demanded? And then I kind of clumped these together. The quantity supplied price has either increased or decreased, so it's moving along the curve, quantity demanded. So they're different, but they're basically mean the same thing, is that it's just a movement along the curve. But then a change in supply or a change in demand means something other than price has affected it. And for the test, this is what we were supposed to go over before yesterday. Part 1 was all vocab, multiple choice, few answers, mostly chapters 4 to 5, and then part 2, all graphs and essay questions about graphs, so supply and demand, equilibrium. I didn't end up putting elasticity on there, we didn't get very far with that. And then you will need to draw some of the graphs. So just be comfortable with doing this, with then labeling everything. So Q, P, y-axis, x-axis. And then, on the one I gave you yesterday, so I had the equilibrium point. I was looking for Q star, P star there. And then this was price, quantity spelled out. X-axis, y-axis, supply curve, demand curve. And then your surplus, your shortage, and then equilibrium point. You what? Oh, my wife's generous.
I put
Yeah, me
like
neither.
D1 and S1.
I put primary, why?
Yeah, that's
I don't know, I knew they weren't right, but I figured I put something in.
No, I went to visit Peter last week. I planned on grading them while you guys were taking the test. That didn't happen. Yeah. So. That one's tricky, trying to stop, think about what it is. But if you would have done QD, QS, this would have been QS. This would have been QD. So we're looking at the demand curve there and the supply curve. Whereas in the equilibrium point, because quantity supplied equals quantity demanded, you can use Q star or QE for equilibrium.
That was what I had originally. That's really upsetting.
Alright, any questions? Do you feel better about this test overall?
Can you post this PowerPoint on Miro?
It is, oh, I thought it was.
Cause I was looking for it last night and I couldn't find it at all.
It is on there, but it
Let me
doesn't like show
see.
the answers.
It just has like the document.
Yeah, it has
Yeah,
like
it just has the
document
document on
It
there.
has like